is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. When I said we are going to talk about Portents of the Degloved Hand today, he said, Hambone, I'm more of a mittens guy. Stu Horvath.
I gotta say, we did an Unwinnable feature on Portents of the Degloved Hand, and I've been talking with Matt a little bit about it. Matt from Exalted Funeral and David Hoskins, and every time they say the word degloved hand, I cringe inside.
Oh, yeah.
It's like one of the most horrible things that I can think of. It's just so gross.
I wasn't sure if that was what I thought it was, and then I Googled it, and some things you can't unsee, bro. Some things you can't unsee. Well, we are here with Matt Johnson, who has an active Kickstarter right now for Portents of the Degloved Hand for MÖRK BORG, coming at you from our friends over at Exalted Funeral. How you doing today, Matt?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show. This is a real honor.
We're glad to have you here. And why don't you talk to us about this absolutely grossly named
Why'd you put that image in my head, Matt?
It's worse if you've actually witnessed it. Let me just put it that way.
Don't Google it.
You know, don't Google it. Hambone is 100% correct on that. Kids at home, do not Google degloved. Now they're all going to do it. But yeah, it's one of those things actually inspired by something I've actually witnessed, and that's all I'm going to say about that.
That's unfortunate.
Wait, hold on a second. You witnessed it? Were you like a mob enforcer or something? Like, what?
No,
is that why you're living in Idaho? Jesus,
it's true. I mean, yeah, witness protect. Well, I was in witness protection up until this
son
moment.
of a bitch.
Thanks a lot. Back to Jersey for me, whether I like it or not. But yeah, no, it was an accident, and really, it was unfortunate. But yeah, it's one of those things where it sticks in your head, and when you're working with a game like MÖRK BORG and you're trying to come up with things that are disturbing, sometimes you have to draw on your own experiences. But yeah, so Portents of the Degloved Hand is a supplement for MÖRK BORG. It is the elevator pitch is essentially tarot meets Star Wars Sabacc meets Magic the Gathering, and then you just gloss that all over with some EC Comics art direction.
These are a few of my favorite things.
Yeah, it's a nice combo. I'm really happy with how it came together.
The Sabacc thing is actually surprising. Having actually interacted with the imagery for the game, as soon as you said it, I was like, oh yeah, I see that. But I didn't see it until you said it. That's interesting.
Well, it's both the physical appearance was partially inspirational, but really it's I'm kind of a Sabacc junkie. It's one of those things where that would be a nice third-party license if, Disney actually understood why they should do that.
Right.
But actually it's the mechanics of how the dice and cards work together. That's really the true Sabacc element.
So with this box, because it is a box set, that
Correct.
Comes with 4 sets of cards, right?
Mm-hmm.
With each set of card, do they range in kind of different vibes? Or is it just? I imagine it's not just a pretty look to have one's yellow, one's pink, one's blood spatter, one's black.
Right.
Is it descending in orders of pain, or what?
I'd say the pain is pretty universal. It is very much a designed to be. And I talk about this in the Unwinnable article. There's a heavy risk element. You are sacrificing something that's of value if you're a character, your omen, one of your omens, and in exchange you're essentially gambling. And even if you're successful, there's probably still going to be some kind of price to be paid. And so it's definitely for the players that are more daring, which I encourage in MÖRK BORG, because you're not going to be around very long anyway, so you may as well go for it. But to answer your question, they're thematic. So there's disaster, disease, destruction, and then death. And then the cards, there's 13 cards inside of each deck, and they stay basically within those themes. So disaster tends to be things that just suddenly happen, and it's disastrous, as opposed to, like, say, the death cards, which really play into pretending you're dead, or things that you experience when you're dead, or, well, not experience because you're dead. That's a weird statement, but anyway, they are thematic. But in terms of any kind of escalation, it's all over the map. There's some cards that are truly horrendous, and then there's some other cards that are honestly more mild, but could be a lot of fun if the GM and players are open to it.
I love the lack of balance, like the complete disregard of balance. It's just like this is going to probably make your game worse or worser. Like there's just like, it just really pushes the pedal to the metal, which is like, thematic.
Well, omens are, of course, essentially MÖRK BORG saving throw. So you're using that when you're kind of desperate anyway, like, oh, things are not going my way, I'm going to use this. This just essentially escalates that mechanic where, holy crap, I'm probably going to die. I'm just going to do something outrageous and see what happens. And who knows, maybe even survive.
Did you look at the omen mechanic as it was in MÖRK BORG and you were just like, this isn't messed up enough, let's screw it up some more?
I was more fascinated by the ritualistic aspect of it, of, you have these things that you're granted each day as a character. And, I think in terms of play, in the imagination, what happens when you use an omen? Like, is it like a little prayer that you say, or, what exactly is that? And then it just made me think, well, what if you could exchange the omen for something else and make it a slightly more ritualistic without, and this is key to the design of the deck, without making it cumbersome in terms of actual gameplay from a GM player standpoint.
Does the player get to pick which deck the card comes from, or is that randomized?
So that's the dice part. You roll the 4-sided die. The die determines, it's like a rune stone essentially, and it determines which of the 4 hands. So in the lore, the hand has appeared at different places and at different times in different forms. And so you roll the die to determine which hand you draw from, and then you draw a random card from one of those 4 decks. So there's 2 levels of randomness, and that's really key also. I think you would have to play an awful lot of MÖRK BORG to actually get through the entire deck and experience all of them.
Yeah, because you're already limiting it, because it only happens when you can potentially use an omen. So yeah, and then you have 2 layers of randomness on top of it, which is that's a lot, actually. And
from a mechanic standpoint, the only thing I emphasize, as it's rules light RPG, so honestly you can do whatever the hell you want, but what I do emphasize for GMs is that players do this at the beginning of play, because a portent is essentially like an individualized prophecy. And so there needs to be that foreknowledge. And that's really key to the psychology of the game, in terms of, it's going to be this thing. This player now has a card in front of them next to their character sheet. That's going to egg them on. They're going to have that in their head now moving forward into the game. And there's going to be that temptation to use it when they think the right time comes. And it's really important that be in the forefront. It's not a spontaneous thing. You can't whip out a deck of cards and get a prophecy in the middle of combat. It has to be done really before anything else happens.
See, that's cool. That is a very, very cool mechanic to me, where like you kind of like in a way see the end of your own movie ahead of time.
Exactly.
And, you have the actual, agency to decide if that's the way you're going to go out.
Yeah. And you don't have to.
Yeah.
You can opt not. And that's another mechanic. There will be a GM guide, digital GM guide that comes with goes to backers that we'll be releasing. And one of the things I'll talk about in that is that omens are issued to a character on a daily basis, assuming you live more than one day, right?
Right.
The thing about the portents is they can stack. So you might sacrifice an omen on a day, not use it, not activate it, or tap it if you want to use magic vernacular. And if you survive the next day, you still have that portent. It's still a prophecy that applies to you. So it is conceivable, unlikely, but conceivable, that you could have a character who survives multiple days, who spent multiple omens, and have multiple portents available to them.
And then if they use them all in one go, it like cracks the world in half, like a spell thing in DCC.
I think that's technically a misery in MÖRK BORG terms. I think you've essentially, unleashed a misery at that point. Yeah.
So we were talking a little bit about this earlier. Me and John are somewhat to blame for this.
You are. Good job, guys. Way to give me a second job and take over my life.
I apologize to all the players who will be impacted by this.
Yeah.
But the GMs will thank you. I guarantee you that. The GMs are going to have a lot of fun with this deck.
Yeah, normally I would say, in the words of Shaggy, it wasn't me. But this time, it was me. It was me all along.
Yeah, so the backstory on that is you've got a longtime listener. I think he's been listening to you almost from the beginning, almost 5 years ago. And his name is Ryan Pitts. He's one of my best friends. I actually dedicate this product to him. I don't know if that's an honor or not, but I did it. Hi, Ryan. I know you're going to hear this. He is a longtime listener, and I was getting back into RPGs after a hiatus, and he's an RPG junkie, and he's always sending me links to like new games and what's going on. And you guys did your MÖRK BORG episode in 2020, and he's like, dude, you have to listen to this episode. You are going to freak out when you find out about this game. And I listened to it, and not only did I become a listener of your show, but I was hooked as soon as I checked out MÖRK BORG, went to the site, started buying books, started buying, third-party material. And I was, hook, line, and sinker.
That's amazing. I really feel like in doing this, I just lose sight of the fact that like anybody listens. It's really just me hang out with Hambone every week.
That's it.
There's so many things have happened here. Like we got a long time listener out of it. We hooked you on MÖRK BORG, and then you have this crazy Kickstarter going right now, which is you've already made your numbers, right?
Yeah. We passed we funded first day. We went through all of our stretch goals, which we didn't have a lot of, but just because it was my first rodeo, and I'm really focused on wanting to deliver a quality product, not just a ton of stuff that people don't necessarily need. And so, we got through all of our stretch goals, I think inside of 72 hours, and it's tracking well. We still have the rest of the month, and then backer kit after that. So, I'm really happy for being my first Kickstarter, and hopefully it's a indicator of how future efforts will go as well. We'll see.
Yeah,
you did good, man. Congrats.
It's so weird to sort of just like to feel like modestly at fault for this.
I think it's great. I think you guys should be proud. I mean, I think you have a huge impact on the community. And I think I love personally what I really love about the Instagram account, and what I love about the show is when you talk about older RPGs. I mean, RPGs have been part of my life since 1981. I think I was 11 at the time, 10 or 11. And it's a huge part of my life, and you guys are keeping a lot of cool things alive and in the front of people's minds. So
thank you so much, man.
Thanks, man. I mean, that really does mean a lot to us. And even though it did lead you to come out with something completely gross and hideous, we're glad to have been a part of it.
You got to stay with the times, I guess. I would like to do things for other games as well. I have some ideas for Mothership, for example, but one step at a time.
What awful ailment are you going to theme the Mothership thing?
Too early to say. I definitely have a story in mind.
Geez,
it's gonna be a good time. But it'll probably give some nightmares to some people. Yeah.
I had decided really early on that I was going to lead with like chiding you for picking such a gross thing to sort of brand your product with. I really did not like this. Totally blew up in my face because I did not realize how squeamish it would make me. Even after we stopped talking about it, I'm still a little squirm inside. It's so gross.
It's visceral for sure. Yeah.
That's a word that gets overused a lot, but it totally applies here. It is 100% a visceral horror.
That's the intended effect. So,
is there anything else you want to promote?
I have 2 other decks that are similar, that are in the works, that I'm in the process of producing. They are also portent decks where you exchange an omen for a portent. The mechanics will be a little bit different in that these are singular decks. One is for MÖRK BORG. The other one will actually be exclusively focused on cyborg.
Right.
Oh, okay.
And because of that, the mechanics are a little different. It will also use a die, but the die, because it's a singular deck, the die functions in a different way. It's almost kind of the reverse of the way Degloved works. Where you draw a card and then you roll the die. About as all I can say about that right now, but I am working on a couple more decks. We'll see how many more decks there are that I can go with. And then I am also wanting to get into some other third-party game development with games like Mothership, like we mentioned, and maybe even some other platforms.
How are you looking to release those additional decks? Are those add-ons for this or
not quite?
Are they secret?
Yeah, they're not secret. I think those are things that haven't been fully decided yet. They may be Kickstarters. They may be pre-order, more on like a retail side. That's still all being determined. And it's a little early to say. And like I said, I'm actually still doing the writing and the artwork for those decks. So they're a ways out. It's nothing I could include in this product, just because we are trying to deliver on a pretty aggressive timeline. I think at this point we're hoping to have it in people's hands by the end of the year. So,
oh wow, is that doable with like a custom shaped set of cards?
Yeah, so I actually we actually have, and we released this in the last update on the Kickstarter. We actually have a white box proof already.
Oh, wow.
If you go to our 5th update, this is you can see the white box proof from the manufacturer. I actually just sent finalized art files to the manufacturer. And with any luck, either around the end of the campaign or shortly after the campaign ends, I think we can probably expect to show backers proof with artwork.
Cool. And you did all the artwork.
I did. Yeah.
We got to talk about the artwork.
Yeah, man.
Sure. Yeah.
Because it's gross.
Well, like I said,
there's disgusting.
There's I leaned into decades of reading, disturbing comics like EC Comics and that sort of thing. Yeah, just kind of tailored my art style to the theme.
It's interesting how your art style works perfectly in sync with the established sort of MÖRK BORG aesthetic, but you also use like different color palettes and choices that also sort of, they aren't the same as MÖRK BORG, I don't think, not really. But they still kind of work despite being different. Maybe is it just the loudness? There's sort of just like is the pushing of the design to its extremes more important to MÖRK BORG, do you think, than the specifics of what goes into the art?
I think so. Yeah. There's MÖRK BORG is an interesting beast from a design and art standpoint because, Johan established what you could argue is a pretty defined aesthetic. And that can actually almost be intimidating. When I first started this project, I spent a lot of time wrestling with, does this look and feel like MÖRK BORG? And to what extent is that important? But to what you were saying, I think that's true, Stu, that it's the loudness, that's where I was like, I'm not necessarily I don't want to emulate exactly to the letter what someone like Johan is doing, or some of the other, more notable MÖRK BORG creators. I'm going to make this my own, but I'm going to find a way that makes it work. And I think, the loudness of the colors, really leaning into it. I kind of see Degloved Hand as being like the Technicolor version of MÖRK BORG, where it's grim, it's gross, but it doesn't have to be black and white. There's color. It's just really disturbing color.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like Johan did really establish like a strong, instantly recognizable aesthetic, which sort of like makes it intimidating, but then is also seems to be easily mimicked in a way that's interesting. But also, I thought that he kind of poured himself into MÖRK BORG that he so much that when he worked on other projects, it would MÖRK BORGify them, like Dead in Space. And that's not actually the case. Like there's actually, like, you can still identify Johan's art, but it doesn't feel MÖRK BORG-y. It's the whole way the aesthetics work and interlock with the aesthetics and feels of the games here is really interesting to me. And it's something that's sort of like, you can't really figure it out yet. Like we almost need to wait 5 more years to see how it all settles.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, you thumb through, Into the Odd, and you can tell it's from probably the same source. But it's not exactly the same. And then, with MÖRK BORG products that are out there, I would say there are people who have understood that you can lean into your own style and own it and still make it MÖRK BORG. And then there are people who really have worked with artists who I think have really just blatantly tried to emulate that aesthetic, and you get varying degrees of success with that. I think you have to be really careful when you do that. I would advise that people make it their own.
So I think that you hit the nail on the head there, because when you look at a certain line of RPGs, and this is just, cosmic brain thinking, but, whether it's 5e, whether it's Call of Cthulhu, anything in that vein always looks specifically like what it is.
Sure.
Whether it's like a third-party publisher doing it, whether it is, a second-tier publisher doing it that's not Daddy Hasbro. Like, it all still has a very similar look and aesthetic, to the point where it is really hard to tell the difference between one and the other. What I appreciate about MÖRK BORG is that it is easily identifiable and it has some really nice broad strokes of what it is aesthetically. However, the people who specifically produce MÖRK BORG, who are MÖRK BORG, they have a very, identifiable design aesthetic that when you're looking at it, you're like, okay, this is MÖRK BORG, like legit MÖRK BORG. And then you have people who try to cop that style, like you were saying, and it really doesn't match, and it is clearly, in many ways, a knockoff of what this original amazing idea was. However, what I love and appreciate about the community that creates third-party publishings for MÖRK BORG is that, yes, you're able to climb into that overall aesthetic, right? But the stuff that really shines is the people who make it their own, and the people who kind of find a way to be like, hey, when you look at this, this is clearly for MÖRK BORG. However, this is mine. This is my style. This is what I'm bringing to the party. And that is something I think that differentiates a lot of the stuff that's made from MÖRK BORG as third-party publishers than for the general fantasy stylings.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Absolutely. So one of my favorite, and I'm becoming just a huge, I guess, cheerleader for them. Madness Heart Games is producing MÖRK BORG related content. They came out with Orc Borg, which is a space. It's orcs in space aboard this colossal, like, generation space starship. And then they currently are wrapping up, or just maybe it's still running, Odd Gobs, which is basically like gig economy goblins, but it's MÖRK BORG based. And the artwork's amazing. A guy named Roland Coons on Instagram. If you're not following him, he's incredible. And he is, to the point that we're making, he's applied his aesthetic, which is super strong, super identifiable. Like you see his stuff and he's applied it to MÖRK BORG or a MÖRK BORG setting, and man, does it work. And, he's, however many degrees separated from the creators of MÖRK BORG, and he's nailing it. I mean, I see his stuff and I equate, anything coming from Madness Heart Games just as strongly as anything that comes from, say, Stockholm Cartel. It's like, that's MÖRK BORG.
Right.
Is it tricky, you think, to make something like Degloved Hand, knowing that there are all these different third-party variants? Like can you use Degloved Hand in Duckborg?
I think you could. Yeah.
Those poor ducks. Those poor ducks.
Yeah. It's pretty generic in terms of, I tried to make it pretty universal, as long as you're using the same ability rolls or something that's a parallel to, like presence or toughness, it should work. There's maybe a couple cards, like there's a card in a Deck of Destruction that is crossbow specific. Now, as a GM, if you were playing maybe even like Cyborg or something and you wanted to use this deck, I guess it just comes down to how good of a GM are you? How would you apply that to, say, a different type of, munition or weapon?
Well, Matt, it's been great having you on the show. Dear listener, if you want to get in on this Kickstarter, you got 17 days left. It is already funded, so you're guaranteed to get what you are backing for. We always talk about how it's important to back in those first 48 hours. It is always important to continue to back throughout the course of a Kickstarter. However, when you get it a little later on, you're going to get what you're paying for. So this is a pretty cool thing. We are excited, wildly grossed out by, but excited about Portents of the Degloved Hand from MÖRK BORG. Thank you again for joining us. Matt, do you want to plug any of your social medias before we go home on this episode?
Oh, sure. The best place to find me or contact me is on Instagram. I'm kind of an Instagram junkie, and that is at Raven_Portents. Other than that, my Kickstarter, which is in my bio link on Instagram. And that's probably your best bet.
And we'll link to those in the notes.
Well, very cool. So this is another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Where can people find you on the internet?
They can also find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG, where I have posted about MÖRK BORG, and I will probably at some point post about Degloved Hand if you want to see that gnarly art. I will not be posting about Degloved Hands though, because
don't Google it.
Don't Google it.
Yeah, make sure when you look for this Kickstarter, you go directly to Kickstarter.
Make sure that Portents is there. You don't. It's a lot of danger in this Kickstarter.
Portents and MÖRK BORG. That's the only content warning for this episode. Save yourself some therapy bills. You can find me across the internet at John McGuire RPG on the Twitter, on the Instagram, and on the TikTok. Posting more because I have something to promote. 3-2-1 Action Games Holiday Action Double Feature is on Kickstarter right now, running through May the 4th. It is Hard Times on the Back 9, a mini golf themed adventure where you play two twin siblings fighting the devil in a rousing game of mini golf to save your great grandfather's soul. And Kevin Saves Christmas, a holiday adventure that takes place on the island of Point Nemo. Folks, I never got off the damn island. Where you play a amphibious fish person who brings history's greatest air quotes heroes through time and space to fight the Krampus and save Christmas. Holiday action double feature on Kickstarter right now from 3-2-1 Action Games. If you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe because your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. And if you really like the show, why not become a patron? Patreon.com/vintagerpg. We've got a behind the scenes look at Stu's book, which is titled
Monsters, Aliens, and Holes in the Ground, a guide to tabletop role-playing games from Dungeons and Dragons to Mothership. I almost said MÖRK BORG. They can't all be like last week,
Yeah. You know what? It went too easy last week. It had and also, I keep trying to say still tentatively titled, but
I love it. It's so in your brain now. It's a reflex.
It's so ingrained, and I haven't had coffee yet, so it's kind of hard to discern that. You have a behind the scenes look at my adventures from 321 Actions, what we got going on there as well. We got early release episodes that will come out before, hopefully on Friday, but before the episode airs for everybody else. We have a killer Discord community that we'd love for you to be a part of. And we actually run games for patrons through our Patreon. Stu's running West Marches. I'm running currently D&D 5e, but I've run DCC. I'm gearing up to run Call of Cthulhu because that's what everyone wanted. And we got a lot of cool stuff going on the Patreon, patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Degloved West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.